Happy Friday, everyone. Jeremy Cubas here. So, an unironically blue-haired leftist makes a very stupid argument. So, a man named Destiny appeared on the Whatever podcast to debate Lila Rose and Kristen Hawkins about abortion. And in this debate, he formulates several hypotheticals, or they're known as counterfactuals in academia, and he attempts to use these hypotheticals to make arguments from analogy. Take a look.
They're unconscious.
No, because I said capacity to deploy conscious.
What do you mean by capacity to deploy
As in
conscious?
all of the parts in your brain are functioning and working and can deploy a conscious experience.
So an embryo who is developing their brain will absolutely have the capacity to...
Will implies
but
doesn't
why are you being age discriminatory against that
because
child
when
for
you
not having
say
the ability to develop?
the pieces for a building are not the same thing as a building itself. A seed is not the same thing as a tree.
Is a whole.
An embryo is not the same thing as a person.
No, you're
so when you say,
hold on,
don't stop saying that every single... Okay, hold on.
The
to be clear
embryo
for the
is
audience,
whole.
when you're having a conversation with somebody,
finish,
if you're having a conversation with me and they're not willing to engage with a single hypothetical, or they claim every hypothetical doesn't map on, unless you can clearly explain why, it's because you know that the hypothetical is testing the limits of your belief in a way that demonstrates the absurdity of what you're saying.
So as you can see, he formulates hypotheticals to make an analogy with embryos, seeds, and parts of a building. Now, this is known as the fallacy of weak analogy. And so what do I mean by that? And so one can make a proper inductive reason using hypotheticals. And so, for example, if you take a child who is trying to convince his parents that he should eat chocolate cake and drink milkshake for breakfast, for example, he could formulate an analogy and says, well, would it be okay if I ate a donut and drank chocolate milk? And so obviously one of them is normally understood as a proper, not proper, but at least acceptable breakfast, while the other one isn't, you know? And so the reason why this analogy would work is because what he's trying to show is the inconsistency within the parent's logic. And the way that he will show the inconsistency is that if you take like substance, like a donut and a cake share qualities, right? They can't be identical thing because then it won't be an analogy, it won't be hypothetical, but it has to be of like substance. And so they're both made of flour, they're both sugary, they're both a baked good, and so on and so forth. And then you have chocolate milk, which also is a dairy product, and then you have chocolate milkshake, which is as well a dairy product that has sugar in it. And so these are like substances in which you can then form an analogy to show the limits of your parent's logic. And so that would be a proper hypothetical. Now, what Destiny is doing here is he's comparing parts of a building to an embryo. And so let's take these two examples separately. So the first one is a fallacy because an embryo is already a whole in itself. It's not parts. Parts of the building, like the wood, whatever he's trying to say, the wood, the metals, the glass, and so on and so forth, would be parts of a building. If you have that lying around, he would say that is not the same as the building itself. Now, the problem with this analogy is that the embryo is not a part of a human, or it's not even the part of the development of a human. Like if you really want to make a proper analogy, he could say the sperm, the egg, the uterus, and so on and so forth. These are all parts that make up the actual human, which would be the embryo. And so when these things are separate, yeah, that would not be the same as the embryo, the same way that the parts of the building will not be the same as the building. That would be a proper analogy. What he's doing is just stupid. No, parts of a building is not the same as the building itself is not a proper analogy to an embryo that's already whole in itself. Now, the other one is with a seed, right? He says, well, a seed is not the same as the tree. Now, this would be a proper analogy if you're just talking about the sperm, for example. Yeah, the sperm would not be the same as the human because that is separate from, or at least it's in a situation in which life as a human being has not began yet. And so if you want to make a proper analogy, he would use a germinated seed because a germinated seed already has grown roots, and germinated seed now is already a plant or a tree in its most infant stage. That would be more similar to an embryo or a fetus or whatever he's going to try to construct an analogy. And so this is why his argument just is extremely dumb, and why we should always be skeptical whenever a leftist really does bring a hypothetical to us, because most often than not, this is what they're doing. They're committing the fallacy of weak analogy. And we could see this all the way down with any kind of argumentation in which they bring at us, especially when it comes to abortion, because they cannot really consistently and they cannot really accurately argue for the pro-abortion stance without really committing certain logical fallacies. Well, it's a short show for today, but that's what it is for today. Have a great weekend, and tune in to Contra Gentiles that we're going to be recording tonight and hopefully releasing it by the weekend. All right, thank you. Bye.